So it's kind of a showpiece for us that we use. This magnet here, and I'm going to talk a little bit backwards, this magnet, and what's special about the Rick magnets, and we'll see when we get to the other end, it uses this very special cable. This magnet produces a very intense magnetic field because this cable here carries 5,000 amps of current. And I'll show you in a minute, but that's a pretty impressive amount of current for something that size. So we have many turns of that cable to produce a very strong vertical field. That very strong vertical field is like the banking. If you've ever seen a NASCAR race and you see those, the real high speed tracks, they have very steep banking. This is the banking of the track. This is what gives very strong magnetic field. And if you have a chance, actually it's easier to see on the other end. Let's go down the other end. What you see here is actually a vacuum chamber. And any of you remember the old thermos bottles that had vacuum in them? This is a thermos bottle. And we use vacuum to insulate thermally because in order to get that superconducting temperature, in order to get these magnets to be superconducting, we have to have the cable at 4.5 degrees above absolute zero, 4.5 degrees Kelvin. So we have the outside world here in the tunnel, which is basically at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and we have the inside here at 4.5 degrees Kelvin. So I'm kind of juggling the temperature units, but basically the difference in temperature is about 600 degrees Fahrenheit from the inside to the outside, 500, 600 degrees Fahrenheit. So we have to use a vacuum thermos to keep it cold here so that we don't lose too much energy, absorbing energy into here, because to cool this to 4.5 degrees Kelvin, to get this to be superconducting, we need that refrigerator over there. That's going to be your next stop. That's actually the refrigerator there, and that's the compressor. Anybody ever see the compressor on their car when the air conditioner is about this big? That's the compressor room for this. And that over there is the radiator for the system, that water tower in the background. And what's most interesting is the capacity, not the delta T, the capacity of the system. It's about 2 home air conditioning units. But the difference is you're going 500 to 600 degrees Fahrenheit from here to here, where in your home air conditioning, 20 degrees Fahrenheit. It's the difference between shooting a payload into space and taking something up an elevator, a service elevator in the building. And that's the thermal difference. Why do we use superconductor? Number one is we can get lots of current in this little piece of superconductor. And the yellow fellow took my little piece of copper. But if this was a piece of power line about this much in diameter, that would carry 500 amps. Ah, there it is. This is 500 amp cable. This is 5,000 amps. The other thing is, when the electrons jump from copper ion to copper ion here, they do lose a little bit amount of energy. It's sort of like they're jogging, they use energy. The electrons here, they're just gliding on ice skates. There's very little voltage drop. In fact, all the way around the ring, 2.4 mile in circumference, plus these coils, which have almost 100 turns, the voltage drop is about 10, 15 volts. In your home, your voltage drop is 110 volts to run your fan, that little fan motor. So you can see the amazing amount of difference and power that you need to run something like Rick and to run something like the AGS, if you get a chance to stop over there and look at the AGS model, which uses copper conductor. So that's the two things. And as I said before, this is a vacuum bottle, but not just vacuum. All this plastic here, if you remember again from your old thermoses, they had like an aluminized inside, that very shiny aluminum looking, and that was to reflect back photons of energy that are coming from here, trying to get from here. So every bit of photon of energy hits each one of these layers, and many of them are reflected back, so that there is very little thermal exchange between the inside world here and the outside world here. Like I said, 2 home air conditioners there, but again, imagine that's 2.4 miles in circumference, and you're cooling it with 1 home air conditioning system in capacity. And that's because of this very, very good insulation. The other thing is, we do have to support the magnets. They don't float in there. So they're a special plastic that has low thermal conductivity that's here and at the far end to support the magnet. And we call it heat stage. That's halfway through that support. We actually use this here, and this is a heat shield. This is at 60 degrees Kelvin, 60 degrees above absolute zero. And the reason is it's cheaper to cool helium to 60 degrees Kelvin by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude than it is to cool it to 4.5 degrees Kelvin. So we stage a lot of the heat to here, we absorb the heat here, we use gaseous helium to cool this stage, and then we use liquid helium to cool this stage. All right, so we go from room temperature to 60 Kelvin to 4.5 Kelvin, and the temperature difference between this is much smaller, much less heat gets to here. Okay. The other thing that happens is that refrigerator produces liquid helium, and it goes all the way around the ring, actually halfway around the ring, and then it returns in what we call the helium supply line. What the helium supply line does, it provides helium for what we call recoolers, and we'll explain it in there, but there's pressure drops in the helium, and each pressure drop gives you refrigeration capacity. So there are 6 sectors in RIC. Each sector has 7 recoolers. And what those recoolers do is, as the helium, liquid helium is moving through, there is heat still coming in, very little, but it's still coming in. It's boiling that helium. So as the helium's moving through a sector of RIC or through this magnet, a little of it's going from liquid to gas, and that's how it's absorbing the energy. If it goes totally to gas, the temperature starts rising. This all of a sudden gets above like 6 or 7 degrees Kelvin and actually loses enough energy that it starts becoming conductive. Once it becomes conductive, it produces more heat, and it goes into a sort of a death spiral where the magnet can no longer carry that current, and there's a special system that dumps the energy out of that magnet and takes it out of the system, but we're off. We call it a quench. I don't know if it's because of a quench, but you know, if you imagine all that helium has to boil off. So we have to recool that helium to drive up the liquid capacity in that helium, so that again, that we can recool, that we can keep this all cold and keep it stable at 4.5 degrees Kelvin. If you look on the table over there, that coil there is for a quadrupole magnet. That's what we use to focus the beams. This is a dipole magnet. They have a chance to look before you go. You'll see there's a slight bend. So we have a vertical field in this magnet. If you remember your right-hand rule from high school, you have a charged particle, electrically charged particle, moving through a vertical field, and we're constantly pushing the beam in these magnets towards the center of the ring. So for each one of these magnets, there's a quadrupole magnet. The duty of the quadrupole magnet is to keep the beam focused, keep the beam tight. Because again, it's all like charged particles, trillions of them. They all want to repel each other. We've got to use lots of field to keep those magnets, to keep that beam focused.
I thought these would have been curved to go around the ring.
Well, look in here. It's very slightly curved.
Oh, wow.
Again, it's 2.4 miles in circumference, so you can imagine just a gradual curve going all around. There's 240 of these in an arm. Any other questions?
You can see this curve.
Normal operation.
We lose about $100 worth of helium a day. Helium is about 6 times the cost, well, let's see, right now, it's about 8 times the cost of gasoline. So, we do lose helium because helium is a very small particle, right? It's the 4th. So it wants to leak by the seals everywhere it can.
Imagine so.
So it's very expensive, not only in electric power, 5 megawatts to run that system, but also in helium. Any other? Okay, so the next stop is the helium refrigerator.
But it's not. It's not.
Hopefully that group that's in there will be moving out soon. Any other questions? All right, please, I ask you if you can move towards the open garage door over there.
All right, guys, go.
Never saw coils like this.